Hi everyone. Before we get started, I just want to remind you about a couple of webinars that recently opened for registration. First, we have Jung and the Environment with Jungian analyst Dennis Merritt, PhD, LCSW, on Friday, October 1st from 1 to 4 p.m. via Zoom. We also have Jung, Buddha, and the Middle Way, a historical and personal journey with Jungian analyst Barbara Friedman, PhD, on Friday, November 5th from 1 to 3 p.m., also via Zoom. So for either of those, you can just visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks. Welcome to the Jung Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Today we have the second episode of Healing Cinema, where Jungian analysts Judith Cooper and Dan Ross discuss Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 film Rear Window. They touch on a number of topics, including Anima and Animus, Puer Senex, projection, the fear of intimacy and marriage, the patriarchal gaze, the Coniunctio, the Shadow, and the Trickster. They also mention the fairy tale of Bluebeard, which they also mentioned in the last episode, so there's a link to more information about that in the show notes if you're interested. And before we get to them, I want to share submissions from our listeners. Patrick from Toronto, Canada says, I'm 22 and I developed an interest in Jungian psychology following a set of problems I went through in my teens where my mother and I became estranged for about a year and a half, during which I fell into a toxic relationship. After about that amount of time, I ended up going to therapy and my therapist recommended I read The Unconscious Mind by Jung, which was my first real introduction to his thinking. I subsequently found this podcast trying to understand his thought better, and I'm looking for concepts that could allow me to better understand my social environment, thus reducing my anxiety which has developed since my teens. I have avoidant tendencies and am trying to use Jungian thought to reframe my problems such that I can improve. Thanks to everybody who has shared something about themselves so we can get a sense of who our listeners are. You can learn a little bit about each other. If you'd like to submit something, just click the link in the show description for a link to an online forum where you can share a little about yourself. You can support this free podcast by making a donation, becoming a member of the Institute, or making a purchase in our online store. Your support enables us to provide free and low-cost educational resources to all. So now here's Judith and Dan.
Hello. Hello again. This is Dan Ross, and I am with Judith Cooper.
Hello.
We are analysts at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, and this is our second episode of what we have called Healing Cinema, in which we look at a film and talk about it from a Jungian perspective, also from a psychoanalytic perspective. And last time we did Gaslight, and this time the film that we're going to talk about is Rear Window, Hitchcock's film that some have considered to be one of his best films. I think that's up for debate. It certainly got our interest enough to bring it into this podcast.
Yes.
And I think last time we talked about what's our purpose in providing this, and we talked about so just as a reminder that we want to use film, because both of us love film, as a way into understanding Jungian concepts, Jungian analysis, and just the whole world of analytical psychology. And film provides us some mechanism for that and gets us out of our head, which is always a temptation and a hazard with this stuff, right?
Yes.
It gets us into our body,
It,
right?
it does. And John Beebe, the San Francisco analyst, says we actually get to see the archetypes behaving on the screen.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. And interacting.
And
Wow.
interacting, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce kind of the demographics of the film. Actually, before I do that, I want to throw one other thing out that I was telling Judith I was going to include that I didn't include with the Gaslight podcast, and that is a statement by Jung when he was in his essay on literature, the psychology and literature. Was a statement about what he saw as the difference between a psychological work and a visionary work of art. And the difference kind of moves us into working with these films to raise the question, which is this? And this statement, I think, reflects what Jung meant by the difference between the two. He says, quote, "In dealing with the psychological mode of creation, we need never ask ourselves what the material consists of or what it means. But the question forces itself upon us when we turn to the visionary mode. We are astonished, confused, bewildered, put on our guard, or even repelled. We demand commentaries and explanations. We are reminded of nothing in everyday life, but rather of dreams, nighttime fears, and the dark, uncanny recesses of the human mind." Isn't that wonderful?
It is, yes.
He also said in that essay, one of the differences in the psychological and the visionary is the psychological work is more about the artist, and the visionary is more about the archetypes or the what the underlayment of consciousness.
Yeah, but Dan, I think with Hitchcock, we could say that he straddles both of those because he's a visionary because he does pull images from the collective unconscious, and he puts his own neurotic issues on the screen as what's called an auteur, which is his own creative vision. You can't mistake a Hitchcock film for anyone else. So it's interesting that distinction is it's both.
It really is
of a visionary filmmaker like Hitchcock.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's sometimes thinking about this film in particular, it was so tightly constructed.
Yes,
in a Hitchcockian way that leaves you satisfied in one sense and unsatisfied in another sense. That what are the things that are breaking out of his tightly constructed story? What's breaking out? And I think there's some things that stood out for you that we can talk about. And I remember, I'm jumping ahead, but we'll go back to the beginning. The thing that stood out to me the next time I watched it after you mentioned it was Jimmy Stewart's reaction to when Grace Kelly was in trouble, when she was being attacked, when she was, and it was really, I think, telling. That was a moment, his, rational and very calm demeanor that, was prevalent. That's everything unraveled for him in that moment. Yeah. Which is very interesting. So let's keep that in mind.
Absolutely. His emotional reaction, his terror of harm to her was extreme. Yeah. So should I read the summary then?
Yes, please do. Let me preface it with the. Of course, the film is directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The writer is John Michael Hayes, and it's based on a short story, "It Had to Be Murder" by Cornell Woolrich, starring James Stewart, Grace Kelly, Wendell Corey as the detective, and Thelma Ritter as the nurse.
Yes, okay. The story is that Jimmy Stewart plays as Jeff, is a globe-trotting photojournalist confined to his Greenwich Village apartment while he recuperates from a broken leg. Bored and frustrated by his incapacitation and immobility, he begins to spy on his neighbors, one of whom, Lars Thorwald, he suspects of having killed his wife. Although disturbed by his voyeurism, Jeff's physiotherapist, Stella, played by Thelma Ritter, and his glamorous young girlfriend, Lisa, played by Grace Kelly, help him investigate the murder, eventually bringing Thorwald to justice. And I need to say, I think that that's a summary from the new book out by Edward White called 12 Lives of Alfred Hitchcock. So
It sounds like a fascinating book
yeah,
to get into Hitchcock, because I think, you're right that when we're looking at a Hitchcock film, we're looking at all of Hitchcock, because it's hard not to think of his other films. And to, and I don't do that with a lot of directors, where you start looking at one work and then the other works conjure up and you're wondering, wow, what's going on here?
And that's because Hitchcock actually references his other films. I mean, in this one, there's a couple lines where somebody says the dog knew too much, his upcoming film after this, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Anyway, yeah.
I love that. What was the other one?
I think there's another line about how women, I can't remember. I think maybe it's a reference that somebody said, it ends up women know better. Women know better.
Women know better. Okay.
The Man Who Knew Too Much.
The Man Who Knew Too Much. I love it.
Hitchcock appears in every one of his films.
He does.
So it's like a through line there.
He does. And how he appears in this film fascinates me. He is standing by in the studio of the songwriter, while the songwriter is on the piano, and he's winding the clock or setting the clock or something, says something to him. Just the image of time is interesting to me, because time is structured, time is mortality, time is Senex. Right, going into the Jungian idea, and Jeff is quite the puer, isn't he?
Yes.
Afraid to grow up.
Yes, he's terrified of getting married.
Yes.
From the opening scene, he's referencing he's in trouble because his girlfriend Lisa is after him to get married.
Yes.
And almost every interaction is about. When he comments on looking out his rear window, looking at his neighbors across the courtyard, he sees one after the other, most of them either lonely and trying to be in relationship or in dysfunctional relationships.
Yeah, it seems to be dominated by a longing for love. This is a movie about problems with love, and various versions of love and various versions of relationship. This is about the masculine and the feminine, and the complications and difficulties around that, including one aspect that presents the murderer. Right, one resolution to a marriage is murder. Right. And I'm thinking about that in terms of, this is just post World War II, but not too post World War II, in which
1954,
and men are coming back from the war, getting married, having baby boomers, and so what did they bring back from the war was my thinking. If we look at the historical context.
Yes.
Film. They bring back aggression and rage and murderousness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And then how does that spill over into attitudes toward women, the women during the war that took over some men's jobs? And,
right.
And how we know that in the 50s, they had to settle back into their role of domesticity.
Right.
But that aggression is key. I think just even in terms of the image of the voyeurism, it seems like a passive activity, but I think there's a lot of aggression in it.
Yeah. It is aggressive. It's penetrative.
Penetrative, that's a good word. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's the opposite of puer too. Would that be?
Yeah. It's I think I was thinking of the penetrative aspects of the voyeurism in terms of kind of a substitute for true aggression, a substitute for direct aggression. It's all it's passive, and it's almost as if he's conjuring up in these rear windows, what's going on inside of him. I mean, that was my first thought, right?
Completely projective, right?
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, I think we could say that even his suspicion of a murder says something about his own double binding of wanting to murder Lisa. I mean, that's belief, but he loves her, but he feels so entrapped by her.
Yeah. Yes. That article, I have to reference because it brought up something I didn't catch by Gerald Eisenberg. It was a review. That wasn't the one. It's the one I sent you. It's a review. It's by Robert Benton, psychoanalyst, and it's Film as Dream, Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Windows, back in 1984. What he suggests, which I didn't make the connection to, was when Lisa comes to spend the night and she pulls out her nightgown, her negligee, that it resembles Mrs. Thorwald's nightgown.
Okay.
When she was in bed and invalid in her nightgown.
Yeah. Well. So
which go along with what you're saying that he's that he's projecting in a sense the murderer, the predator, the murderous inclinations that are unconscious to this rear window world.
Right. I think there's a lot of projections flying around in this movie, because I would say too, he identifies with the wife. Because he's immobile. He's stuck in a wheelchair, Jeff.
Yeah, that's right.
He probably sees himself as damaged temporarily. So he both identifies with the wife and the husband, but Mr. and Mrs. Thorwald. And
maybe the identification with the wife is more conscious, and the identification with the murderer is more deeply unconscious.
Deeply unconscious, yeah. Well,
but I think you're right that he sees himself as disabled. I mean, he is disabled. He complains about it to his editor.
And he's used to gallivanting around the world. Right. He's chomping at the bit to get back up again, and so he's really feeling trapped.
Right.
But that's interesting image of Lisa appearing in the nightgown, and that could just set him off all over again in terms of a threat.
Yeah.
Of what she wants from him to be married.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the beginning, the introduction of all the characters in the Rear Windows, and then Thelma Ritter's revealing conversation with him about his dilemma with Lisa and his not seeing any way that their two worlds can come together. So already he's rigid. I saw the image of the cast as reflecting his rigidity and his
Yes.
personality, right? He's just
Yes.
he's in this rigid place where he can't move physically and psychologically.
Right. And the psychoanalytic article we read relates it to the image of castration and vulnerability in the masculine. And so it's more than just his own rigidity, but maybe the rigidity of masculinity in the culture, perhaps. I mean, I think there's some thinking about Hitchcock. He made a lot of his female actresses suffer, literally, but there's some critical views of Hitchcock, and there's that say that one critic in particular it says that we're not sure whether he's a feminist or he's a misogynist. Because he shows a lot of images of women suffering in the culture.
Yes.
You can go through that, go back to Miss Lonely Hearts at some point.
And you made the comment a while back, which I had been thinking about, that why does Hitchcock require all of his women to subject themselves to all these dangerous life situations in order to get into relationship with the masculine? Right? And here's another example of it.
Yes, and you have pointed out, Dan, it's the immature, undeveloped masculine that puts the feminine at risk. That's so beautiful. That we see this so clearly in this film. Yeah.
It's almost as if his psychological state is conjuring up this whole dangerous thing. And as I suggested before, when he sees Lisa in the struggle with Thorwald, and he panics and just beside himself. It was so well acted. That scene is when I think we really see a coming to terms with the predator, the fantasy, the murderousness, the dangerousness of this. There seems to be some type of break that happens there.
Absolutely. We don't see that kind of, we see his admiration of her heroism and before that, but the fear of losing her it overcomes him with just terror. He doesn't, it's so well acted. I would say too, Dan, this is a generalization, but men's dependency needs are really hidden and repressed.
Yes.
And as all along he's fighting, connecting with her, and the threat of losing her, it overwhelms him. Yeah. He can't barely tolerate it.
Yeah, I think the dependency is an interesting thing to think about, because in my practice, I experience men's fear of intimacy, and it's connected to their fear of vulnerability, fear of dependency, unresolved dependency needs that were never fulfilled in life, are unable to come out in their mature relationship or in their marital relationship or their significant relationship. And there's great resistance to that, as if it would bring utter humiliation to do so. And I think and so now he's put in a dependent position. Life forces him into this dependent position.
That's right. Just stuck in that wheelchair.
Yeah.
And of course, from what you just said, the cultural complex, the culture supports a certain view of masculinity that leaves out this generalization leaves out that dependency needs as a part of masculinity.
Yeah. I was thinking about Hemingway, and I was quite surprised. This was yesterday. I was quite surprised. I said, boy, he and this character of Jeffries, I had some similarity there. And, this is 1954. Hemingway
Interesting. Yeah.
was, reaching his peak, at least in public awareness. And I don't know when he got the Nobel Prize. It may have been somewhere in there, but there's a sense that his personality is so dominated by this aggressive, masculine, macho, going out into dangerous situations, and which is what Lisa is reacting to. Why is that the only way to exist? Right? Why is there not softness? Why is there not domesticity? Why isn't there, some of her world?
Right. And they'll have each other. I mean, they'll connect. They'll have a relationship. So and we see him. Interesting to track, and it's only after multiple viewings.
Yes, right.
Put this stuff together. We see him the first night that she comes to visit him, and they talking about marriage, and she sees his resistance, and then he says at some point, well, why can't we keep it status quo? And she goes to leave, and instead of saying good night, she says goodbye.
Goodbye.
And he panics.
Yes.
And because he's afraid that this is it, she's going to leave.
Yeah.
And the late relationship will be over. And I think, Dan, that's when everything gets ratcheted up about his suspicions about Thorwald killing his wife.
Oh, is that interesting? Say more about that.
Well, that he's so threatened by the loss of Lisa that he's got to distract her. I think it's a great distraction, and project all of this murderous rage onto Thorwald. Or what else?
That's so interesting. Well, it certainly pulls her into, this, after her first reaction to his voyeurism, but then he pulls her into this drama that's unfolding.
He pulls her.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to think about, that he had this sense of panic.
Yeah.
Right. And what occurred to me was he was so into his thinking, and Lisa attempted to use her thinking function against his thinking function, and it just, went down a rabbit hole. And she ended being frustrated, and her demeanor and her sense of hopelessness, I think was evident, before she left. But perhaps, as you're saying, that he has no connection to his feeling function.
Right.
That when because it doesn't make sense. Here he's presenting this apparently well thought out case that the two of them can never be together for all the reasons that he gave. And then she says, well, goodbye, implying that they'll never see each other. And then he panics.
Yeah.
Suggesting that he's not even aware of his feelings towards her.
Right. Yeah.
It's so interesting. And that the film, speaking of feeling function and connection to intuition, as rational as he is, this whole film seems to be about intuition.
Right. It's all about intuition.
Right?
Yeah.
And, and so the rational character now becomes the detective, whereas all the other characters are intuitively convinced that this, Thorwald's the murderer.
Yeah.
What do you make of the scene when and there's two images that come to me that seem parallel somehow. The scene when she first arrives, when Grace Kelly first arrives, the way Hitchcock presents this is a shadow looming over predominantly sleeping Jimmy Stewart,
right?
And the shadow, and it's a long scene, slowly comes over his face. He's not startled. He opens his eyes, and then you see the camera. You see her face looming in.
Yes.
For a kiss, and then the camera goes into this slow motion mode, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
Like this kiss
Yes.
is the kiss. This is this has got to be the kiss of the century or something. The way he films this thing, which is so interesting. But the only other scene where there's anything close to that in terms of a looming figure was it when Thorwald attacks him and he starts coming in. You know what I mean? There's no kiss, of course, but there's. I'm wondering what he was thinking about that, you know?
Connecting those up is really, really interesting.
It's like, okay, he put a lot of thinking into how am I going to direct the kiss scene and how am I going to direct the attack scene,
right?
With these similarities. It's very interesting. I don't know what to make of it.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
I think maybe in that early unfolding of the plot, he does see her as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
She's too perfect. I have to let her know. It's the only honest thing to do. Even though the kiss is, it's like, it wasn't in that psychoanalytic article said something about the kiss of the hero, but by the princess is going to instead it's a reversal of the prince kissing the sleeping beauty.
Yeah.
And there are other Hitchcock kisses like this. The one in Marnie where he zeroes
Sean
in.
Connery,
Sean Connery and Tippy. He just zeroes in on that connection, the physical connection between man and woman. It's like it's so numinous to him.
Yeah,
it's like the connection he never had in his Alfred Hitchcock in his life, maybe.
Yeah.
He's just captivated by that.
Yeah. The Coniunctio.
The Coniunctio, right.
Is so
right, that union.
It's numinous. Yeah, just the way he filmed that, there's a numinosity to it.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other kissing scene where they're just in each other's arms. The second night she's over, maybe it is.
Yeah.
And then he immediately goes to the window to look at what's happening. It's such a huge distraction.
Yeah.
I want to bring in here, though, I think we mentioned that there's a seminal article in film studies by, perhaps you know it, by Laura Mulvey in 1975 called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. And she uses Rear Window, and I think she uses a couple other Hitchcock films to name the male gaze. And it's and so that phrase has been taken up by film studies and other psychological and film to talk about we would say now the patriarchal gaze of men looking at women as objects for their own pleasure. And that's all through this film. From the opening shot of the when Jeff is on the phone with his boss, the helicopter is circling the rooftop and sees these sunbathing women. And Jeff oogling his torso, and that's the part where it can come off as Hitchcock getting that patriarchal view of women. Women are there just to be passive objects for male gaze.
You're right. And even the detective, that scene with where he comes in and Lisa's there and he sees the nightgown and Jimmy Stewart says, watch it. He says, he warns him, watch it. Because he knew what he was thinking.
Right. Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah.
Like it's okay if he objectifies, but it's not okay if the detective objectifies. Right.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of going back to this idea that this is about longing. Remember the scene with the artist, or they're all artists, but the artist with the sculptor, when asked what it's called, she said hunger.
Yes.
And perhaps, as we said, that this Rear Window and all these characters and all the passion and emotional content and suffering is all going on within Jeffries,
Mm.
and he is completely unaware of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought of that too, Dan, that even Miss Lonely Heart
Mm-hmm.
is is imaging a part of himself that he has no connection with, but he's fascinated by.
Yeah.
Just watching her go on this date, just sit and drink and fantasize dating someone, and imagining a man in her apartment. That somehow, somewhere, I thought maybe he, by rejecting Lisa and being married, he's maybe a tad worried about being alone, but it's so out of his consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right about that, because he's too casual. He's he's sleeping. He's he reminds me of the character Nick Carraway in Great Gatsby. He's just observing life, and it's so easy to judge the life that's unfolding and that he's writing about, or narrating. But what about judging his life when he's not living? Everybody else is at least living, right? All of these characters in Rear Window, they're living. They may be suffering. They may be in heaven. They may be, creating, but they're living.
Yes.
In a way that he isn't.
And he isn't, even though before his accident, he was a gallivanting journalist around the world.
Right.
And maybe I wonder if we could say that was incomplete for him in some way.
Yeah. It went too one-sided.
Too one-sided.
It lacked intimacy. It was we could imagine him doing this all by himself. He didn't talk about relationships other than with his editor or his boss, and this old friend from the war.
Right. The detective.
We don't have a sense that his life is at all filled with intimacy.
Or meaningful and
meaningful friendships, relationships.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So is the predator in him that's going after such dangerous life situations, kind of as a voyeur, right? He's taking pictures of dangerous life situations, countries that are being overthrown, races, car races, and that he's kind of feeding off of that.
Yeah, it's
right?
Putting it right, feeding off of it, right?
But it's not nourishing. It's not nourishing his soul.
No. Right.
And on some level, he knows this. On some level, I think he knows this.
Yeah, and could we say, I agree. I think that's great. And maybe could we say that that's the archetypal self at work, this accident, to put him in this immobile, vulnerable position that's so compensatory to how he was living his life, so that he can face some of these things that have been left out of his life. Yeah,
I read, I've been seeing this, it's attributed to Jung. I've been seeing it 3 places over the last couple of days, 3 completely different places, one of which is in the Black Book. And Sonu Shamdasani mentions it in the first one. But he says, whatever is not made conscious meets us in the outer world as fate. Isn't that wonderful? And I think that's one line sums up this film, that whatever is not made conscious meets us in the outer world as fate, that all that transpired in this film is fateful in some way.
Yeah, it comes off as all projection, but it's fateful projection. Yes.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to also remind us, because we mentioned this in Gaslight, the allusion to fairy tales, because Gaslight, we had a husband that undermined the it's the sanity and integrity of a woman, his wife. But in here we have a murderer. And here we have a Bluebeard.
Yes.
Right.
In the flesh. Right.
In the flesh. Now this is dismemberment. So
yes.
I think it's an interesting illusion. There's a lot about dismemberment in this dialogue and storyline.
Yeah. It haunts the whole film.
It does.
And we never see it. Thank goodness. But it's Hitchcock puts us right there, and it's mentioned, but it goes right into our imagination. I mean, at one point, does Jeff say, how do you do that? How do you, when he sees, he says, how do you cut up a human body?
Yeah.
But then the humor too, like the nurse, the Thelma Riddick character, Stella, says something about at the end, when they discover that the head may be in a hat box, and he says, the detective says, do you want to see it? And she says, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah. And then she realizes what she said.
Yeah, she gets the pun, which Hitchcock has said that puns are the highest form of intelligence. I mean, that's the kind of humor we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
Which is a puer kind of humor.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then I think Stella has an earlier comment about they wouldn't be able to get my wedding ring off my finger. They'd have to cut my finger off.
Yeah.
All these humorous allusions to this dismemberment.
And the ring itself, I'm glad you mentioned that, becomes a symbol, right? It becomes the key bit of evidence to convince the detective that there's something here. There's something here. And of course Lisa goes after it. Yeah. And the fact that she puts it on her finger.
She does.
I mean, this whole thing is about marriage and the Coniunctio, and and here the proof. It raises the value of the image of the ring, and of course the ring itself is an image of wholeness and the self and so forth.
Right. Yes.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say that I didn't catch, I caught this recent time, is that the temperature, and the camera deliberately shows the temperature at the beginning of the film in the 90s, 92, 93. Yes. And then at the end, it's at 70. It's like, which is so alchemical and so Jungian, isn't it? Right? That this heating up of the vessel that he's in, right, is everything that's going on in the film, and it heats up to this crescendo, and that then the resolution of it then brings the temperature down.
It brings the temperature down, but Hitchcock being Hitchcock, I would say, wouldn't you, that it's left ambiguous.
Yeah.
With that last scene of Lisa in kind of more blue jeans and loafers, not in her high heels.
Yeah.
And reading a book about the Himalayas, but then takes out her Harper's Bazaar.
Yeah.
It's just not clear. And of course, Jeff's got 2 broken legs.
Yeah.
Thrown out the window by Thorwald. But it's that's the trickster, we were saying earlier, the trickster work of art that is left ambiguous.
Yeah.
And that feels so Hitchcockian. There's no kind of tying all this up. The heat may have broken. Right.
And there's no resolution obvious in the 2 protagonists. But the resolution is in the outer, in the rear window stuff. I mean, there's the Lonely Hearts. Miss Lonely Hearts finds the songwriter, and that's a budding relationship. The Miss Torso. Why they call her Miss Torso. Her husband or boyfriend comes home, who you wouldn't expect. There's a lot of unexpected things, right?
Yes.
The married couple that's presumably having sex throughout this whole film. the husband loses his job or quits his job, and the wife gets all upset. I wouldn't have married you if I knew you were going to quit your job.
So some resolution, but some not.
Yeah.
Unresolved.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There was a review separate from the article that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
It was a one-page thing by Gerald Eisenberg that I found on the PEP. It's from 2001, and his conclusion was that the two were transformed. His impression was, when Thorwald catches Jeffrey spying on him, he comes to his apartment to kill him. Jeffries manages to hold Thorwald off just long enough by using flashbulbs to blind him, no longer the merely passive photographer observer. The change of camera use becomes the symbol of Jeffrey's transformation. When he falls from the window through which he has been peeping, he breaks his other leg. Yet now, with two casts on, he's no longer psychologically immobilized. Both he and Lisa have grown up. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Maybe this is my stuff, but I really don't agree with that.
Yeah. Well, there's really no evidence in them that anything's changed, that their situation has changed.
No.
Maybe what the Hitchcock rescuing romance, if that was part of what transpires in the rear windows, might suggest that there is change in their relationship, but we don't know that.
No, I would say we don't.
Yeah.
I would say maybe, I would concede that maybe he's not going to do his voyeurism anymore. Like that the fact that image of the blindingness with the flash bulbs.
Yeah.
The opposite of that intense voyeurism.
Yeah.
So the blinding and the voyeurism maybe are a pair of opposites, that maybe he's learned his lesson. And that maybe brings us to this whole issue that you brought up about privacy and social media.
Yeah.
Previously.
What do you think about that?
Well, I was thinking about that. I think it's a really great contemporary, theme to bring in. And I think the whole issue of social media is very, I can't think of the word to use, but I think it gives us an illusion of control. And so we think we're connected, but in a lot of instances, we're not. And the epidemic of loneliness in the culture, I think, speaks to that.
Yeah, I agree. The paradox for me is that social media is about the front window. It's what we want people to see. The rear window in this film is what we don't want people to see.
Right. All about the shadow.
Right.
All about the shadow.
But I think which is interesting as far as the theme in terms of integration of the shadow. If the film is, again, a Jungian spin, if the film is about integration of the shadow in order for the anima work for the man to be done, animus work that needs to be done, the shadow first has to be integrated. That would be telling. But if we look at social media and what it means that only this well-sculpted version of ourselves is presented, that simply constellates the jealousy and envy of
and
others.
The trolls,
and the trolls. Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Which brings us to the speech that one of the neighbors says when the dog is killed.
Yeah, I'm glad
Where is
you
your
brought that up.
neighborly feeling?
Yeah.
We don't care for each other anymore.
Yeah.
That seemed pretty central, even though it was not. And then, Dan, it made me think of 10 years later. Do you know this case? It was a famous case at the time, but it was this 1964 in New York. A woman, Googled it because her name was Kitty Genovese, the Kitty Genovese murder in New York. She was murdered and raped, and she screamed out, and all these neighbors heard her and did nothing. And it's
I
since
remember
been
that.
called the bystander effect.
I remember that.
And
Yeah.
so Hitchcock, I think, is kind of prescient in that way,
Yeah.
that the film has elements of this with the speech when the dog is killed. Of course, it fits with the plot that as soon we said earlier, it's so well constructed, you can almost track how Jeff and Lisa go in and out of, well, it can't be true, it's not true. And then like Doyle the detective has just said, I have all this evidence to show that she was not murdered.
Yeah.
And then the dog is killed.
Yes.
Or Miss Lonely Hearts is attacked. Or
Yes.
so there's this off balance all the time.
Yeah.
That keeps us as viewers in this unsettled, what's going on? We don't know. Also, the image of the apartment, there's a blind spot in I think we mentioned this, there's a blind spot in Thorwald's apartment.
Yeah, yeah.
Cannot see the action there.
Yes.
It's just so brilliant, right?
It is, because it creates a desire in the viewer to want to be in there, right? And the frustration that we're stuck in Jeffrey's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
We're all stuck there.
We're
stuck there with him.
Right. We're all, there's this idea too of as film viewers, we are also immobile in our chairs watching this film. And the whole film, it just implicates us in terms of our own guilt for watching. I think in that psychoanalytic article, he talks about the film viewer as this film is about film viewing.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yes. And he also, I think it was in there, that this idea that everything is from Jeffrey's point of view until the murderer breaks into his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And the viewer for the first time, the audience for the first time, gets to see what the murderer sees. And that's when the flashlights are going off, the flash bulbs are going off.
Mm-hmm.
The camera shows us what Thorwald is seeing.
Right.
That he's, and the adjustment back to eyesight. It has a particular psychological effect, right? That, okay, now the murderer isn't across the courtyard anymore. Mm-hmm. It's not so distant. The murderer is right there. In fact, now we're in the psychological perspective of the murderer, which is interesting to think about, right? That Hitchcock has masterfully made the murderer little by little closer and closer and closer, suggesting, well, the murderer is in us. Right?
Yes.
The murder is really in us, and which was what which was Jung's idea of the shadow, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We've met the enemy, and he is us.
He is us.
Yeah. Even watching it again, even like we don't when Lisa's across the courtyard, and she looks up at Jeff, the camera doesn't see what she sees. It's always Jeff. Yeah. It's I wanted to see her from her point of view.
Yes.
Looking up at him and seeing him, but that doesn't happen.
No.
Always his point of view until Thorwald is on top of him.
Just so interesting what would it be? The discipline? Hitchcock's discipline. This is his version. This is not necessarily in the short story. I haven't read the short story, but that the temptation to go outside had to have been great, right? To tell the story. I mean, he had to deliberately, decide, okay, this is, even the beginning of the film with the opening credits, he's, slowly raising the shades, right?
Yeah,
This is opening up a world from which we're going to have this one perspective and be locked into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just so interesting.
Yeah. And I think true in that we're all locked into our own perspective.
We really are.
We struggled. I mean, that's the work, right? To get out of our perspective and to see how we're not the universe doesn't organize around us.
That's right. Anything else?
The ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemma of voyeurism. I mean, there's actually,
that comes up in there, doesn't it?
It does. There are actually explicit lines, and here, this is the trickster archetype again. The trickster carries that moral ambiguity. There's actually a line where when finally the detective says, "No, I've got all this evidence to prove that Mrs. Thorwald was not murdered," Jeff actually says, "I wonder if it's ethical to watch a man with binoculars and a long focused lens. Is it even ethical, even if it's proved that he didn't commit a crime?" Yeah. So he's really working over this theme. And Lisa does it too. Lisa's caught up in that and saying, we're so ghoulish. How can we be so depressed that they're here? Doyle just presented the evidence that the wife isn't murdered and they're disappointed. So that whole guilt dilemma, sin, punishment, guilt, I think all of this is in the film.
Yes.
The voyeurism and
well, see, it seems the other side of the coin of intimacy, right? If the accusation by that woman is that nobody cares, nobody pays attention, nobody the accusation is there's no intimacy, there's no closeness, there's no that the other side of the coin is voyeurism, meaning that once you start looking into another, it can take on this question of voyeurism, right? I mean, there has to be, for it to not be voyeurism, it has to be consent, and it has to be agreement by both parties to share each other's inner life.
It is a pair of opposites. It's not, when you have real authentic intimacy, there's not voyeurism there. There's no secrets or hidden aspects or secrets to
right. The other thing that I didn't mention, but that stands out in one of my viewings, was the very beginning. If we the first words spoken come from a radio that is in the songwriter's apartment when he's getting ready. He's waking up. It's in the morning, and a commercial comes on. It's a man's voice that says, "Are you over 40? Are you a man over 40? Are you listless and tired?" And like that, which kind of sets the stage. It implies that if there's emotional disability going on, if there's psychological stasis going on, that the problem is with the masculine. And the masculine is listless, right? And that this is the remedy, apparently. The psychological work has to be integrating the shadow, confronting the shadow out of this listlessness.
Right. But my fantasy is that commercial might have been for some pre-Viagra remedy, right?
Yeah.
To
because he shut it off. We don't know. That's right.
And then we've got the image of the phallus and this huge cast dominating Yes,
Huge
great.
cast. I never saw a cast like that going all the way up to his chest. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
I mean, he could, well, they would had to because he couldn't even get up to go lock the door because he
right.
knew Thorwald is coming down the hallway and he couldn't even get up to do anything about it.
Right. Well, everybody just walks in. The doors are not locked.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing maybe we should mention too is the dream references. And of course, he's dozing through a lot of the beginning of the film and misses some of the action, keeps us off guard.
A key piece, a key scene.
Yeah, key piece, right. But the this whole connection between, is he dreaming? Some of the songs that are played have if I'm dreaming, let me not awake. It's so fascinating because cinema and film and dreams have been connected. It's said that cinema is a collective dream mode. That, you know, it's unstoppable images when we dream that we can't turn off.
Yeah.
And that dreaming is like a cinema of the mind.
Yeah.
So there's this connection between cinema and dreams.
Yeah.
So that's in the film too. And that goes along with
that's a good point.
And projection.
Right. Right. That's a real good point. This whole thing is like a dream, right?
Yeah.
And he's dreaming.
Yeah.
What else do you make of this sleepy? I mean, there's this dominance of sleepiness. He starts out sleeping, he ends the film sleeping, and he's dozing off. He misses when Thorwald brings his girlfriend to the apartment, and then they're seen leaving, and everybody thinks that's Mrs. Thorwald, and he misses that. We see it, but he doesn't.
Right.
Reminds me of Rip Van Winkle, you know, this.
Yeah. Well, like to your earlier point, he's living a one-sided life. Maybe we could say he's been sleeping.
He's sleeping.
Not fully awake to his life and all of what needs to unfold to make him get out of that one-sided way of living and be more whole.
To grow up. I mean, the Puer and Hitchcock's masculine characters, Cary Grant, North by Northwest.
Even in Notorious. Yeah. They're terrified of intimacy.
Well, what do you think?
I think
anything left unsaid?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So we'll leave them in an ambiguous state of deciding what to do with their relationship.
I'm voting for Lisa coming out ahead.
Yeah.
Feisty. I mean,
she's so strong as a female character.
She really is a strong female character, and that comes across. She calls him rude, but she takes it and she comes back. And you know, it's like that line about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Ginger Rogers does everything that Fred does, but she is in heels and doing it backwards.
Yes.
Well, she's not. She wants to prove to Jeff that she can be adventurous and daring, and does that. He does that all.
He needs that. Yeah, he needs that for some reason. What do you think that says about his relationship to the Anima? That I mean, if the beginning suggests that it's static, it's disabled, it's impaired, that he's, you know, if she, you know, as an Anima figure for him, well, why is he expecting all of this danger? You know what I mean? It's an enigma to me. Why does he need this danger, or maybe it's manifesting the danger in terms of his relationship with Animus, dominated by all this danger in terms of his work, in terms of, finding dangerous life situations to photograph, that his relationship to the Anima is characterized by all this danger, but it's unconscious.
Right.
And then the film or the story makes it conscious by virtue of the fact that, this woman that he loves is put in this mortal danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I think could we name it the Puer Animus? Sorry, the Puer Anima.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a Puer Anima. But you're right that he's got to see it and project it and see it in the outer world.
Yeah.
To understand it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a great scene where when she puts the letter early on, maybe a third of the way through the film, they decide she's gonna go over to his apartment, Thorwald's apartment, and slip the note in that he writes.
That's right.
What happened to her? What did you do with her?
Right.
To kind of
right.
Up more. And she comes back, and there's a shot of Jeff looking at her with such love because she dared to do that.
Yeah.
He's just enamored of that piece of her that is able to do that, and I think what you're saying of him, he's still caught in that adventurous ego.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to, why do these women have to go through such lengths to be in relationship with him? Because there's no evidence of his, taking in domesticity, taking in, a softer version of human existence. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. My thinking when you see both casts, both legs and casts, my thinking is, when is he going to wake up? What does it take? It's almost like toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
What will it take for him to wake up and see that what he's doing is incomplete and not working, and putting people that he loves in danger?
Yes.
What's it going to take?
The desperation of that. We talk about how for psychological work to progress, there has to be a realization of one's desperateness, right? That the unconscious, it gets activated in situations of desperation.
Right.
And I thought that the moment of desperation was when she was being attacked and he was helpless to do anything about it.
Yeah. And of course we see that clinically. People will not change until things get really urgent and they're back against the wall, and then they'll consider submitting to what's going on. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I think we nailed it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Judith.
Thanks, Dan.
This is wonderful again. Thank you so much. And we'll be thinking about our next film.
We will.
For the next installment of Healing Cinema.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
It's good to see you.
Same here. Good to see you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it all you like as long as you maintain the attribution to the speaker, but please do not change it or sell it. If you like this episode, tell your friends about us or leave us a review on iTunes. For more information about classes, training programs, videos, audio, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, www.jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2020 donors who gave at the contributing member level and above. Barbara Annan, Usha and Ashok Bedi, Jackie Cabe, Bryan, Eric Cooper and Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Dougherty, James Fidelibus, John Korolewski, Marty Manning, Dyane Sherwood, Deborah P. Stutsman, Deborah Tobin, Alexander Wayne and Lynne Copp, Gerald Weiner, Karen West and James Taylor, and Ellen Young. If you would like to join our generous community of supporters, just go to youngchicago.org/give.